Before anything else, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and leave a like, because this story is unlike anything you've ever heard. It's about a man forgotten by time, land, and people, until the day hoofbeats echoed across the plains. His name was Moses Carter, and for 15 years, no one had crossed the threshold of his porch. He wasn't just alone, he was invisible. The mail didn't come. No neighbors. No curious children. Just the wind, the cattle, and the memories he tried hard to bury. Every morning, he rose before dawn. Every night, he lit a single lantern and stared into the dark. And he was fine with that, or at least, that's what he told himself. Moses Carter had once been a respected man, even feared in some circles. The Civil War took much from him, his brothers, his land in Georgia, and something in his eyes that never quite came back. So when he headed west to New Mexico, he didn't do it to start over. He did it to disappear. He bought a piece of land no one wanted, dry and cracked like his soul. The soil fought him. The sun punished him. But he worked it anyway. Planted beans. Kept goats. Raised a few steers. Spoke to no one. And over the years, the townsfolk in the nearest settlement spoke of him like a ghost, something they'd once seen but no longer did. Then came that day. It was early spring, and the wind carried dust like whispers. Moses had just returned from checking the western fence line. He was sweaty, tired, and ready for coffee. That's when he heard it, the sound of horses. Not one, not two, a dozen at least. His spine straightened as if pulled by invisible strings. Horses meant trouble. Horses meant the past might finally be catching up. He reached for the shotgun hanging above the door, but before he could lift it, he saw them. Figures in the distance. Silent. Slow. Riding like ghosts. The group approached with calm but purpose. Apaches. Their long hair flowed with the wind. Feathers, beads, and earth-toned blankets covered them. They weren't dressed for war, but they weren't here for a picnic either. Moses stood still on his porch, boots planted, hand resting on the wooden rail. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just watched. The riders stopped 10 feet from the steps. A boy, no older than 16, dismounted first. Then a woman, older, worn by time, but sharp-eyed. She stepped forward and removed her hat. Silence. And then she spoke. "We don't want trouble," she said. Her voice was cracked, but clear. "We just need shelter. For one night." Moses studied them. He could smell their horses, the dust, even the tension in the air. He thought about the stories he'd heard, the ones white folks spread in saloons about savage raids. But he knew better. He'd seen who the real savages were, back when he wore blue and marched through burning towns. Still, trust was a luxury he hadn't used in years. He looked at the woman, then at the boy. Then he nodded, once. Just once. That nod cracked open something that had been frozen inside Moses for too long. He turned his back on them, a dangerous sign of trust, and walked into the house. He lit the fire, put on coffee, pulled down the extra cots he hadn't used in over a decade. They followed quietly, removing their boots before entering. No one asked questions. No one explained anything. The Apaches sat around the fireplace like shadows flickering on the wall. And Moses, the man who had eaten alone for 5,000 nights, now had guests. He poured coffee without a word. The boy's name was Tony. The woman was his grandmother, Lewa. There were others, cousins, uncles, a mother carrying a baby wrapped in rabbit fur. They didn't explain where they came from or where they were going. But Moses understood. You don't ride that far unless you're running from something, or towards something bigger. They didn't ask for food, but when he brought out beans and cornbread, they accepted with soft nods. Around the table, silence reigned. Not awkward, sacred. The only sound was the clink of spoons and the occasional wind rattling the shutters. Later that night, Liwa spoke again. Her voice low, like a fire burned behind her throat. She asked Moses if he'd ever heard of White Knife. Moses frowned. That name wasn't from his past. It was older. Apache legend. A warrior, half-blood, half-fire, known for mercy and wrath in equal parts. Liwa said White Knife had once spared her life, and now, she believed Moses was his descendant. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. He was just a farmer, just a man. But Liwa's eyes didn't waver. You carry something, she said. Something not born of soil. He didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid, but because something inside him had shifted. The presence of these people, strangers who didn't talk too much, didn't ask for anything, and yet carried centuries in their bones, made him feel seen. And it had been so long since anyone had truly seen Moses Carter. He sat on the porch with his shotgun across his lap, not out of fear but habit. He stared at the stars. The wind whispered names he hadn't heard in decades, of brothers lost in war, of his mother singing hymns under the kitchen light. He almost cried. Almost. Dawn came slow. Orange light peeled across the plains. The Apaches were packing quietly, like they'd never been there. No goodbyes. No thank yous. But Liwa approached one last time. She placed something in Moses' hand, a carved bone, shaped like a blade. She said nothing, only nodded. Tony climbed onto his horse and gave a faint smile. Then they rode off, disappearing into the same silence they had come from. And Moses stood there, hand closed around that bone, wondering if he'd just dreamed it all. But the fire still burned inside. And the house smelled of coffee. Moses didn't return to normal after that visit. He tried. He fed the animals, repaired fences, and hauled water like always. But something in the air had changed. Or maybe it was inside him. That bone knife stayed in his coat pocket. Every time his fingers brushed against it, he felt warmth. Not from the bone, but from memory. From presence. He started walking farther each day, checking the tree line, watching the hills. Not out of paranoia, but out of hope. He didn't know what he was hoping for. Maybe that they'd return. Maybe that someone else would. One afternoon, weeks later, Moses heard another sound he hadn't heard in years. Laughter. Children's laughter. Not from a radio. Real, sharp, and unfiltered. He dropped his shovel and followed the sound. Past the barn, near the watering hole, he saw them, two small Apache children playing in the mud, giggling like nothing in the world could touch them. Their mother stood nearby, nodding at him silently. The same group. They'd returned, not with words or ceremony, but like the wind, quiet, familiar and certain. Moses didn't speak. He just tipped his hat and kept walking. From then on, the visits became regular. Every full moon, every change of season, the group would return. They never stayed long. A night, maybe two. But each time they came, Moses prepared. He'd make extra stew, clean out the cots, stack wood near the fire. And each time, Liwa would bring him something small. A feather, a wrapped leaf, a piece of flint. Gifts that felt older than gold. He kept them all in a wooden box beneath his bed. He never asked questions. They never explained why they trusted him. The silence between them was its own language. One summer, Tony brought him a horse. A young, wiry Mustang with eyes too wild for most men. "It needs a name," the boy said, and Moses raised an eyebrow. "Why me?" Tony shrugged. "He listens to you." The Mustang didn't buck when Moses touched him. Didn't flinch at the rope. The two stared at each other for a long time. Then Moses whispered, "Ash." Like the tree. Like what remains after fire. Tony smiled and nodded. That night, they all shared dinner under the stars, passing stories without ever opening their mouths. Just eyes. Just silence. But peace is never permanent in the West. One evening, riders came, not Apache, but white men from town. Drunk. Armed. Loud. They stopped at the edge of Moses' land, spitting in the dirt and calling out for him. "Heard you're harboring savages," one yelled. "Ain't no law out here, old man." Moses stood at his door, shotgun resting easy on his hip. He didn't speak, didn't blink, and the riders, sensing something older and more dangerous than bullets, turned back. The land didn't forgive cowards, and Moses had never needed words to protect what was his. The Apaches didn't visit for months after that. The silence was heavier this time. Moses waited. He rode Ash to the hills, searched the arroyos, even left food where they usually camped. Nothing. Then one morning, he found a sign. A stone, standing upright, with 3 feathers tied to it. A message. He didn't know what it meant, but it wasn't farewell. It was promise. That night, he sat by the fire with a bone knife in his hand and whispered a name he hadn't spoken in years. Brother. Because something about those people had made him feel whole again. When winter came, Moses found himself preparing anyway. He stacked wood higher, cooked too much stew, even cleaned the second room, just in case someone needed it. Snow fell in quiet waves. The land froze over. Coyotes cried at night. But Moses didn't feel lonely. Not anymore. The land was still, but not empty. The presence of the Apaches lingered like smoke in the walls, like footsteps on the floorboards. Every creak of the house reminded him that this place had been filled with life again. And for the first time in decades, Moses felt like a man with a home. One night, in the middle of a snowstorm, Moses heard knocking. Not at the door, on the barn. He grabbed his coat and lantern and walked out. Inside, he found Tony. Cold. Bleeding. Half frozen. Moses didn't ask questions. He pulled the boy in, wrapped him in wool, and started a fire. The boy didn't speak for hours. Then, just before dawn, he whispered, "They took her." Moses didn't need to ask who. Liwa. Someone had taken her, and they had brought the boy this far before scattering. Moses looked into the fire and stood up. He was done waiting. He saddled Ash, loaded his rifle, and packed food. He didn't know where he was going, but the land would show him. Tony rode behind him, weak but alert. They followed broken tracks, bits of fabric, distant smoke. For 3 days, they rode. On the 4th, they found her, tied near an old prospector's shack, guarded by men who had no idea who they were messing with. Moses didn't announce himself. He didn't shout threats. He just walked in, calm as Sunday, and aimed. It ended fast. He carried Liwa out without saying a word. Justice in silence. They returned to the ranch under a sky thick with snow. Liwa was weak, but smiling. Tony cried. Moses didn't. He just stoked the fire, boiled beans, and let the silence fill the room like music. That night, the Apaches stayed longer. They sang. They danced. The house echoed with sound again. Joy, sorrow, life. And Moses, the man who once hid from the world, realized something he never thought possible. He had a family again. Not by blood. Not by law. But by something stronger. Something earned in fire, fed by trust, and sealed in silence. Spring returned with soft rains and blooming wildflowers. The farm transformed, no longer barren but alive, thriving under Moses' care and the Apaches' gentle hands. They planted corn, melons, and beans together, their work a dance of cooperation and hope. The sound of children's laughter once again filled the air, echoing across the wide plains. Moses watched from the porch, a quiet smile on his lips, feeling something he hadn't in years, belonging. The land was healing, and so was he. The wounds of loneliness and fear slowly closed like the petals of a flower at dusk, finally embracing the light. Moses taught Tony how to read the stars and track weather, while Liwa showed him the sacred rituals of her people, the songs to call rain and the ways to honor the earth. They shared meals and stories beneath the endless sky. This blending of worlds brought peace to the ranch and renewed strength to Moses' spirit. The neighbors in the nearby town began to notice, some with suspicion, others with quiet admiration. Rumors that Moses had found friends again began to spread, softening the wary eyes that once looked away. He no longer lived as a ghost but as a man reborn. One day, a letter arrived from a distant relative, a reminder of the life Moses left behind. But he no longer longed for the world that had cast him out. His roots had sunk deep into this land, watered by the friendship and trust he'd found with the Apaches. The letter sat unopened on the table while Moses tended to his crops. The only news that mattered was the one that grew green beneath the unforgiving sun. With each passing day, his heart grew lighter, nourished by the bonds forged in fire and silence. The community around the ranch grew stronger. The Apaches helped repair the schoolhouse and organized gatherings where stories of old blended with new hopes. Moses, once a figure of fear and mystery, became a symbol of resilience and unity. The children ran freely between the cabins, their footsteps a steady heartbeat that kept the land alive. The old wounds of history began to heal in this unlikely place, where two cultures intertwined, building a future together one day at a time. Years passed, and the seasons cycled like the turning of a great wheel. Moses grew older, his hair silver but his spirit steadfast. The farm became a sanctuary, a place where anyone seeking refuge could find shelter and understanding. Visitors came from neighboring towns, drawn by the stories of the black farmer who had tamed the land and the Apaches who had reclaimed their freedom. Moses greeted each guest with quiet dignity, a man who no longer needed to prove himself. His life, once marked by solitude, was now rich with family and purpose. Tony grew tall and strong, learning the ways of both his people and the land. Moses watched him with pride, seeing in the boy the hope of a future where differences mattered less than shared respect. Liwa's presence remained a constant source of wisdom, her stories weaving the past into the fabric of their daily lives. Together, they honored the traditions of their ancestors while building something new, a legacy that would outlive them all, rooted in courage, trust, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. When Moses finally passed, surrounded by those who loved him, the land mourned with him. His funeral was a gathering of many, neighbors, friends, Apaches, and children whose lives he had touched. They laid him to rest beneath the mesquite tree, his favorite spot, where the wind whispered through the branches like an eternal song. A simple stone marked his grave, engraved with the words, "Here lies Moses Carter, a man who found home where no one else dared to look." His spirit, like the land, would live on forever. The ranch remained a beacon of hope, tended by those who had come to call it home. Each year, on the anniversary of Moses' passing, the community gathered to celebrate life, unity, and the strength found in forgiveness. The story of the black farmer and the Apaches became legend, not as a tale of division, but as a testament to the power of compassion and resilience. Children grew up hearing about the man who dared to open his heart, and the riders who answered with friendship instead of war. In the end, Moses' greatest harvest was not the crops he grew, but the love and trust he nurtured in a land that had once rejected him. His story reminds us that even in the harshest places, where silence has ruled too long, there is always room for connection and healing. When we open our doors, and our hearts, unexpected families emerge, carrying us through the darkest nights into the light of a new dawn. Moses' legacy lives in every blade of grass and every song sung beneath the wide open sky. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share your thoughts below. What would you do if strangers rode up to your gate after years of solitude? We bring stories like this to life, stories of strength, hope, and humanity in places forgotten by time. Thank you for watching. Until the next story, keep your hearts open and your spirits strong.